Hello, it's a pleasure to be with you all in Japan. I hope you're having a great time. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there with you, but I'm glad that I'm able to join the room and present the research that I did for this workshop. Now, the research that I did is aimed specifically at the topic of the call for papers. So the call for papers said this workshop aims to identify the current capacity for and the difficulties in creating and sustaining the digital representation of traditional knowledge. So what I wanted to do was say, okay, what is the current capacity and what can be done? What is being done about representing for under-resourced languages? And I didn't have a pre-existing set of research that was out there. I thought, okay, let me specifically look at things that we can look at this question afresh for this workshop. And I didn't want to go and look at what software is out there or what tools are out there. That's Andre and I did a nice job of that a few years ago, and it's really a very difficult question to answer. If you were going to sit there, how do you go and look at every single piece of software and see what languages they take care of, what languages are they localized for, or within natural language processing, how do you get a full comprehensive list of all of the language toolkits that might be available for what particular thing, or for parsing, for identifying part of speech, for all of the different things that you do within NLP. Getting that sort of information would be a huge project. There's no master list of it. I wanted to ask how under-resourced are under-resourced languages within computational linguistics and natural language technology. I had this premise that resources are created by people. So if there are people who are working on the resources, then they will come into existence. If there aren't, then they're not going to come about. And so I thought, okay, let's look and see how much person power is actually being invested in under-resourced languages. If people are working on it, then we can posit that there will be outputs. If people are not working on it, then what we can expect on the visible horizon is going to be very little. Part of my premise is that it is possible to have really good, high-quality resources for any language. It would be rather racist to assume that you couldn't get good resources for Bengali or for Nahuatl just because those those languages are so complex. People are speaking at such a much higher level that we couldn't do for Nahuatl or for Bengali what we could do for what we've already been able to do in recent decades for English and for some other languages. So I started with this basic idea that there are three categories of languages. There are a few languages which can fit in this small box of A in the yellow. I can't point to you on the screen, unfortunately. So English, and then the FIGs, French, German, Spanish, maybe Italian, and I hadn't really seen the resources to justify Italian in that inclusion for the highest level of language technology. And then but there might be some others that are that A level. And then there are about 25 languages, maybe plus a little bit, maybe minus a little bit, that have a significant amount of work, not at the highest level, but that wouldn't be categorized as under-resourced, mid-resourced, or even heading towards these high resources. And so that would include many of the official languages of the EU, Chinese, Japanese, Russian, perhaps Arabic. It's difficult to judge at my level of Arabic knowledge, but I know that there's a lot of work going on, so we wanted to go out and see. And then there are all the rest, the category C languages. So that's the 7,000 languages out there that are, of the 7,000, give or take, 6,900 something languages that really have very little going on. And that includes some very large languages like Swahili or, pretty much any African language. And to a large extent, even the major languages of India, which have some have people working on very interesting projects, but not the resources devoted to really be bringing them even up into the B tier in many cases. And so then I posited that I put out this thing where you see that the investment in language, the actual investment is huge amount in the A languages, and again that's what we can argue about the A languages. A much smaller amount in the B languages, and then very small in relation to the overall pie in terms of people and money going into the C languages. Now then I actually have more recently done a more accurate graph in terms of where the things are with machine translation, And if you think of these, so now you've got 7,000 by 7,000 grid, and there's this little line in there, which is a little white line you see in the corner. Those are and this is actually very much at pixel by pixel proportion, which is why I got the big piece of fabric. That white line pretty much shows the languages that are handled in Google Translate. So that's one language technology. So we're not saying that everything is taken care of with those, but the ones that are said to be in Google Translate is English to 102 other languages. So very thin little space, and then down below that you might be able to see there's a red dot, and that's all the other languages to other languages that aren't in dealing with going through English that anybody is working on in machine translation. And the rest, which is about 25 million pairs, is completely untackled. So that's the space that we're talking about largely for the C languages. So what did I do? I'm not going to say that I did the most intensive investigation possible. There's lots of data out there, and there's lots of data. There are no particular data sets that are specifically already configured to do this. So it took a lot of going in and basically taking something that was not intended as a data set and turning it into data. And so there are a lot of things where it could be done, but it would be a huge amount of time. And after a period of time, you start to get the same. You start to come to an set of answers that are repeating the same information. So what I went to do is I went to a few places where there is a lot of information. So the linguist list jobs board. I looked at all of the jobs for that were posted in 2017 for a few different categories, and then I looked at all of the papers that were at the COLING, the 2016 International Conference on Computational Linguistics. All of the papers that were presented at the the 5th International Conference on Language Documentation and Conservation, and then also at that conference, this was in Hawaii, there was a small workshop on computational methods for endangered languages, so that was a special sidebar. And then that's what in the paper that I prepared for the Japan conference that you're at. And then more recently, I've been actually doing some research about quality of Google Translate across the languages that they work that they have in their list, and I'll mix in a couple of the preliminary findings from that to correspond with what I'm talking about in this paper. So first, I looked at the linguist list jobs, and there were 426 jobs that were posted in applied computational or text and corpus linguistics. Now there are a bunch of other categories I did not include because lexicography, things like that, because I'm specifically interested here in language technology development and what we can learn regarding language technology for various languages, particularly category C languages. In those job listings, 309 mentioned one or more languages. So there were 42 languages total that were mentioned, and then there were these categories: African, Aboriginal, foreign languages, kind of in large, Germanic, indigenous languages of North America, something called multilingual, Pacific Pidgins and Creoles, Romance, and Turkic. So you see some of those are more likely to be dealing with category C, and then but most of these actually are one-offs. So Aboriginal, indigenous languages of North America both had one mention each. So of the 426 jobs that 309 mentions, English specifically was mentioned 128 times. Now these numbers aren't going to all add up to the exact same thing, because some jobs mention more than one language. But then there were also these 117 unspecified listings, and unspecified, very often when you go into the description, you see that the unspecified means English. If you're dealing with computation, you're dealing with some sort of aspect of English computational linguistics. Not always, so you can't pin these numbers down specifically, but if we add in the category A languages plus including English plus the unspecified, and assume that some of the unspecified are also dealing with English, French, German, and Spanish, you get 344 listings. Now, Spanish is very high in the list of second-order languages within Category A. And then the next 25, and remember I'd posited that there were about 25 languages in Category B, The next 25 languages had 160 listings each. And then the last 21 that were mentioned specifically had one language each. And then the next 6,950 had no mentions. Now, there were several languages, Asian languages in particular, large languages like the Indian languages and Vietnamese and a couple of languages, and a language from the Philippines, that had listings only by the companies Lionbridge or Pygmalion. So these are companies that actually have seen a market where there are people speaking tens of millions of people speaking the language. Perhaps Vietnamese is one of them, and they are trying to work on technologies or translation, especially to support translation or NLP for these languages. They see a future in there, so that's a positive sign. For the very few jobs that did not involve these kind of languages that somebody with vision might see a profit in, they weren't computational. They were using technology, but they weren't sitting there pushing forward. So, for instance, this position that for both together called African and Turkish languages was discourse reporting in African storytelling. So, very interesting. I'm sure it'd be a fascinating project. I'd love to see what they've done. I'd love to be involved in it. But that was not that's not pressing forward on NLP. Or cutting and labeling audio, data entry analysis, and retyping something for languages Crow and Keres. Retyping data into a corpus is not pushing forward on NLP. So there weren't professional level jobs for languages for any languages from Africa or South America. So there are these assistant level jobs to work on a particular project, but no professor of this or within a research department at a corporation. Now, the data here is not exhaustive. It's not definitive. There are many jobs out there that are not put on Linguist List. Not everybody who is looking for a computational linguist knows about Linguist List. And in particular, it's not getting national job markets. So where there might be a job for somebody working in Polish is probably in Poland, and they're not posting on Linguist List. And where there is, Romania, Estonia, certainly China, they're not using this service. So you have to assume that where there are some of these languages that have small representation in Linguist List, they still have their own search communities. But that's not the case in Africa, and that's not the case for most Latin American, for most languages within South America, Central America, in indigenous languages of the Americas, and it's not the case for most Australian languages within Australia. But this is giving an indication of at the kind of the highest level research levels. There are big corporations that are posting, big technology corporations that are posting here, and there are major universities who are doing international searches are going to be posting here. So the data is quite indicative, and what's indicative is that there were no jobs anywhere in the world in 2017 on Linguist List or anywhere else that I've seen for work on language technology in the supermajority of the world's languages. 6,900 and close to 50 of 7,000 if we're using those numbers. Okay, what about papers at conferences? I used Coling as a proxy for most computer NLP type conferences. May or may not have been the best, the most representative, but and I wasn't actually at this conference, but I looked at through the proceedings and as carefully as I could, and there were. The conference happened again in Japan, so that probably had something that probably did influence what papers were presented, because people who was going to be able to make the trip were people for whom it would be a shorter voyage, a cheaper voyage probably. So there were 230 papers and posters there. 16 languages were mentioned by names in the titles, and a few of these are languages that are very large but quite under-resourced, like Urdu or Thai and Manipuri would fit in those categories.